How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and I hope you guys are having a great day. As in this video, of course, we're going to go in detail on how much snowfall accumulation each area of the United States should experience based on several factors such as the El Nino pattern, as well as the typical what the computer models are stating. We're going to take a look at all of that to determine how much snow you should receive in each area this winter. So the first thing we need to take a look at is, of course, how the snowfall anomaly looks like during El Nino years, and this compared to a long-term average between 1950 and 2009. So there's plenty of years for certain El Nino years to compare to. And what we typically see during an El Nino when it comes to snowfall accumulation is that the southern United States, for the most part, experiences more snowfall than usual, as we see a stronger subtropical jet move through the southern United States, which not only enhances the moisture right around the southern United States, but also taps into the cooler air mass that's just to the north of it for the chance to rise for snowstorms in the southern United States. And the biggest snowfall anomaly is located anywhere between New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas. These are the areas where typically during an El Nino you tend to receive a lot more snowfall than usual, and even portions of the East Coast you do experience right around an average amount of snowfall to slightly above average in certain areas of the Mid-Atlantic, such as New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. You experience typically slightly more snowfall than usual during an El Nino, but it's fairly close to average. The biggest anomalies, like I said, are right around the Midwest, and when it comes to a snowfall deficit, the biggest anomaly would be in the Pacific Northwest, where, of course, during an El Nino, we see a big ridge dominate the Pacific Northwest, which forces a lot of the troughs to move just to the north of the Pacific Northwest, which, of course, decreases a possibility you receive snowstorms in that area. And of course, temperatures are a bit warmer when we see a big ridge dominating this area. So this is definitely something I accounted for in my snowfall forecast. So expect many areas along the southern United States to at least have a higher possibility of snowfall if you typically don't receive snowfall. So potentially the southern portions of the southeast, if you're hoping for snowfall this year, this could be potentially the year, since during an El Nino we see more, we overall see more storms. So of course the possibility of a snowstorm does rise with the increased amount of storms moving through. So and in a lot of these areas as well, expect more snowfall than usual. I definitely accounted that in my snowfall forecasts. And in the northern portions, such as the northern Midwest as well as the Pacific Northwest, expect a little bit less snowfall than what you typically experience. So the snowfall anomaly we see during an El Nino over the United States is very well makes sense when you take a look at the typical conditions of an El Nino, because we see during right about the northern Midwest as well as the Pacific Northwest, it's warmer than average, so of course you're bound to experience a lot more rainstorms and snowstorms, since the temperature would be a little bit too warm typically during an El Nino. And for the southern United States, a lot more storms move through, and it's simply cooler than average for the southeast, so the chance of snow certainly is higher right around the southeast especially, and portions of the Midwest, and including the East Coast as well. Typically during a weaker El Nino, we see, in fact, most of the eastern half of the United States experiences cooler than average conditions during a moderate to weak El Nino, and that's what's forecasted to occur this winter, which is the reason why I do expect the Northeast to experience more snowfall than usual. Let me show you guys how the temperature anomalies look when it comes to weak to moderate El Ninos compared to a long-term average right now. So in this climate division plot, I inputted all the El Nino years between 1952 up till 2018 compared to the long-term average between 1991 and 2020, and we see a pretty significant indication that much of the eastern half of the United States experiences cooler than average temperatures during the month of January. Actually, give me just 1 second. Let me update this to show the entirety of the winter, not just January. Okay, so now this climate plot includes the months of December and February, and we do see clearly the during weaker to moderate El Ninos, which is forecasted this winter, we see temperatures much cooler than average, which makes me believe that you should expect more snowfall accumulation this winter than usual, especially compared to last year for much of the eastern half of the United States. Last year was sort of a bust when it comes to the amount of snowfall the East Coast experienced, thanks to a very strong ridge and a pretty strong La Nina, which prevented a lot of the cooler air to move towards the East Coast. I don't expect that to happen this winter. I expect a lot more snowstorms, and the snowfall accumulation should be a lot higher in many of these areas, especially in the Northeast and the Southeast. If we were to shift our focus a little bit further westward towards the Pacific Northwest, we see that temperatures are warmer than average during a weaker to moderate El Nino, which is the reason why I'm expecting less snowfall accumulation in a lot of these areas along the West Coast. So while the Midwest is expected to experience a cooler than average winter as well, especially the eastern portion of the Midwest, I don't necessarily expect more snowfall accumulation due to the fact that it's typically a lot drier than normal right over the Ohio River Valley during weak to moderate El Ninos. And while the temperatures might be considered cold enough for more snowfall accumulation to occur, I just don't expect enough low pressure systems or storm systems to move through the Ohio River Valley this winter, thanks to the fact that during an El Nino, the polar jet stream is either very far south to the point where it misses the Ohio River Valley, or very far up north, in which case it also misses the Ohio River Valley, which puts it in a weird spot where it misses out on a lot of storm systems, which is the reason why for much of the Midwest, I'm expecting slightly less snowfall than what you typically expect. But for the Northeast, where the precipitation anomaly isn't as large, or at least the precipitation deficit isn't as large, and the Southeast, where we see that at least the coastal Southeast areas do experience a little bit more precipitation. Those are the areas where I mainly expect a higher risk of higher snowfall accumulation than normal. Another thing that's good to take a look at is the NMME model, which is pretty much a computer model that combines all the most reliable North American models into one model to create the most accurate long-term forecast possible. And we do see, when it comes to its forecasts for temperature anomaly between the month of December and February, we do see that much of the southeastern portion of the United States is expected to at least remain around average when it comes to temperatures, while the northern portions of the United States are expected to experience temperatures slightly above normal. But considering the fact that in the past, with prior weaker to moderate El Ninos, all pointing towards the eastern half of the United States to experience colder than average conditions, I'll still lean a little bit more to the southeast and including in the northeast to experience slightly below average temperatures this winter time, which I do believe will enhance the snowfall possibility and the overall snowfall accumulation you experience this winter. While for the northwestern portion of the United States as well as the northern Midwest, this computer model, when it comes to its temperature anomaly, is pretty much very reminiscent of what we see during an El Nino, where it's typically warmer and than average right over the northern Midwest as well as Pacific Northwest. So I do believe temperatures will be higher than normal, which means that you should expect less snowfall than normal in the Pacific Northwest and the northern Midwest. Another reason why I'm expecting more snowfall accumulation than normal right up along the eastern half of the United States is due to the fact that the the NMME model is bringing more precipitation than usual right over this area. And even if there might be some instances where the temperature might be too warm when a storm system moves through, the fact that there's overall going to be more rainstorms moving through, or at least overall low pressure systems moving through, that automatically increases a possibility the snowfall accumulation will be higher than normal, because eventually, with enough low pressure systems, there will eventually be a moment where a warm low pressure system will combine with a cooler air mass for the possibility of a snowstorm to develop. Because of course, the more low pressure systems you bring, the more likely it's going to encounter conditions that would allow for a snowstorm. So thanks to just that probability alone, I expect more snowfall than normal right up along the East Coast. While, of course, during El Nino, we see less precipitation than normal right over the Ohio River Valley and the Pacific Northwest. So expect less snowfall than normal in those areas. Another thing I want to touch on is the drought monitor over the United States. And as you can see, much of the Midwest, mostly the Mississippi River Valley, as well as portions of the western southeast, such as Louisiana, Texas, and even southern Mississippi, and even going as far west as the Pacific Northwest. These areas are under severe drought conditions, and that could play a big role in terms of the amount of snowfall you should experience, because a drought doesn't go away overnight. Of course, for a drought to occur in the first place, there needs to be a pattern set in place that is very difficult to get rid of. And since during a drought we've already seen this pattern set in place, it makes it more difficult to believe that we're going to see conditions like this change anytime soon. And since we're quickly approaching the winter time frame, in many of these areas you could experience your first snowfall as early as November and October in the more localized areas. It makes me believe that these drought conditions will continue and thus reduce the amount of snowfall accumulation you do experience. And in a lot of these areas where you're drought stricken, the El Nino pattern shouldn't help at all, and in fact exacerbate the issue right over the Midwest as well as Pacific Northwest, because we see a strong ridge during an El Nino, which does dry up the conditions for much of the northwestern portion of the United States. So I'll expect these drought conditions to continue and maybe only get worse here on out in the Pacific Northwest and potentially the northern Midwest as well. I do expect the drought to eventually go away right around the southern United States, thanks to subtropical jet moving through. So I still do believe that these areas will experience more snowfall than usual, or at least have the higher chance of snowfall in the areas that typically don't receive snowfall. So definitely keep that in mind. In the southeast, expect the drought to go away, but for these areas, I expect the drought to continue, which means you should experience less snowfall accumulation than normal. So here is my overall snowfall forecast for this winter, the winter of 2023 and 2024. So in the area shaded in red, you should expect over 80 inches. And in a lot of these areas shaded in red, it's very typical for those areas to receive over 80 inches of snow. No surprises there. Not really much not really much of a change when it comes to what you typically experience on average. And just south of that in the darker purples, that's where you should expect 60 to 80 inches of snow. So in portions of the Pacific Northwest, such as this mountain range in Idaho, you would typically experience 60 to 80 inches, but I'm expecting a little bit less this winter thanks to an El Nino and a strong ridge that's expected to build right over this area, along with the current drought that's going on. So you should expect less right around the higher elevations of Idaho and surrounding areas. And just to the south of the 60 to 80 inch range in the Northeast, you should expect right around 40 to 60 inches in the lighter pink shaded areas. In the Northeast, this is a little bit further southward due to the fact that I expect more snowfall than usual in the Northeast. But for portions of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, the area is a little bit smaller and a little bit further northward. I don't expect the heavier snowfall to move as far south this winter, thanks to the fact that it's expected to be drier than average in those areas. And same goes for the Pacific Northwest and the Rocky Mountain area in general. And just to the south of that, expect 30 to 40 inches of snow. It is less than what I put last year for this area, because if you remember in last year's video, I expected 40 to 60 inches of snow right over the Dakotas. I don't expect that this year. It's expected to be drier than average, so but you should still expect a pretty strong winter, 30 to 40 inches of snow. And interestingly enough, much of the Interstate 95 corridor, including New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, you should expect 30 to 40 inches of snow this winter, which is more than what you typically experience in areas like New York City and Philadelphia. Since I do expect more troughs to move through, more nor'easters to develop, and cooler than average temperatures. And just to the south of that, Washington, D.C., expect 20, 30 inches, more than the typical 14 inches of snow you experience. Like I said, same thing, same for the same reasons that I listed for New York City and Philadelphia. It's going to be colder, more nor'easters, so expect more snowfall right around Washington, D.C. And in the Midwest, I did put the 20 to 30 inch area for northward. Same goes at 10 to 20 inches of snow. And then 1 to 10 inches is a little bit further southward this winter, thanks to the fact that we're going to see more troughs. So I do believe the probability of snow developing in the southeast is higher this winter. And at places like Atlanta, Dallas, and potentially as far south as Charleston, South Carolina, you should expect snowfall this winter. As I, at the very least, expect 1 inch of snowfall and a higher risk of snowfall. And who knows, could this move as far south as Florida? We'll have to wait and see. I'm not forecasting that by any means, but I wouldn't rule out that possibility either. And for places like St. Louis, Chicago, Des Moines, Detroit, expect less snowfall this winter. And I expect the snowfall chance in places like Seattle and Portland to also be reduced thanks to an El Nino building. So this is my overall winter forecast for 2023 and 2024. If you want even more in detail forecasts regarding the exact amount of snowfall accumulation that you should expect in your areas, at least an exact estimation, just make sure to comment down below your location or area, and I'll do my best to give you guys a more in detail forecast regarding the exact amount of estimated amount of snowfall accumulation you should receive in your area. So make sure to comment down below if you're interested. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.